So I've been doing videos on what I think the journey should be if you're going for the mini-rig system. So starting with a single mini-rig Mark III and working your way up to a full 2.2 system, and indeed if you think it's worth going for a full 2.2 system. So I started by comparing 1.1, so one mini-rig Mark III with one subwoofer versus two mini-rig Mark IIIs in stereo. In other words, if you've got one, what should your next move be? Buy a Mark III or a subwoofer? My personal opinion is always get a subwoofer, because especially with the Mark IIIs and the sound signature, I know you can change the sound signature embedding equalization settings using the app. But for me, the extra warmth that you get by adding a subwoofer makes much more sense than adding a second Mark III, because for me it's a little bit thin, it's a little bit sharp in sound, in terms of the sound signature. So we got up to a 2.1 system. I just wanted to now finish off my series of videos by saying, is it worth getting a second subwoofer if you've already got a 2.1 system? Indeed, what would the difference be if you've got a 2.1 system? You've already got a subwoofer. One more subwoofer, will it really make that much difference? Gonna try and answer that question. Obviously it's my opinion in this video, but try and give you enough information that you could usefully make that choice from this video on your own. Just to say, all the recordings in this video have been made with the Mark IIIs firing upwards, which seems to be the preferred option with most people. You do get more bass by having its bass on a solid surface. You do attenuate the high end, which is a little bit sharp, by listening off axis. So in all these recordings, the Mark III is sitting like that, and the recordings are made at a 45-degree angle. In other words, it's like listening like this. So I'm going to start by making some comparisons at 40% volume.
Down to the ground, you're dragging me. It's constantly. No, I won't make a sound. I love the pain. It sets me free. It's wrong, I can't think right. I love the bird below you, telling myself that this is the last. It's wrong, I can't make right. Slipping off in the moonlight when I knew the truth. I had myself for you. On the ground, I know the truth. I know the truth. Oh, now I'm on the I'm shaking now, 'cause you say those things.
I'm on my own, broken and alone. I feel the rain crashing down all around this empty town. I'm searching for the lost and found, but you don't care, you're unaware. Keep moving like the scars aren't even there. It's in the air like a blazing flare. Just stare, 'cause the flames will burn us. I thought you were the one for me. That's why I gave you everything. Held you close by the stormy seas. Oh, you meant the world to me. I used to kiss your head when you cried for me. Hold your hand while the pain was over. Keep you warm by the roaring sea. You meant the world to me.
So it's not that easy on these recordings to pick out the difference at 40%. In absolute terms, Minirigs 2.1, 2 stereo Minirigs in a subwoofer, bass peak minus 22.6, 2.2, bass peak minus 21.5. In absolute terms, is a decibel louder in the bass when you add a second subwoofer and going from 2.1 to 2.2. The difference in average terms, the RMS 16.8 minus 16.8, 2.2 minus 17.8. So a decibel louder in the bass, decibel louder overall on average. But the interesting thing is using A-weighted, in other words, slanted towards what your ears actually hear. So you're less sensitive to lower frequencies and higher frequencies. A-weighted means what your ears are more tuned to hearing. In A-weighted terms, minus 25.8 to 2.1, minus 25.2 to 2.2. So less of a difference in terms of what you're likely to hear with your ears, which is why it's hard to pick out on the recordings. If we're just talking about how loud they go, half a decibel on these recordings across those 2 tracks, although a decibel in absolute terms. However, what you also get, and doesn't really come across that strongly in these recordings, is proper stereo separation. As much as they say bass isn't directional, having separate subwoofers to handle left and right does give you a bit more clarity and a bit more sparkle. So yeah, there's definitely a difference. It's a decibel louder. You add your second subwoofer. But what, 40% is what I would call relatively low volume. And by the way, I should point out all my recordings are also made in high gain, and I've set the appropriate settings in the app. So if I'm playing 2.1, I'm setting in the app as 2.1. If I'm playing 2.2, I'm setting it as 2.2. Now, I don't think it makes a lot of difference at these low volumes, whether you set it in the app or not. I can't hear that much difference. However, 40%, clearly it's a decibel louder going with the second subwoofer. But at these volumes, given that it's 140 quid for another subwoofer, you might not think it's, a no-brainer to go for that second subwoofer. I think if you're going through a Minirig system, ultimately you're probably going to end up at 2.2 to get the most out of it anyway. Because don't forget, when you go 2.2, you're getting full left-right separation. So when you play in 2.1, you're getting, say, right channel on one speaker, left channel on the other, but left and right for the bass on the single sub, which is why you have to reduce the volumes in the app of the 2 Mark IIIs to match the subwoofer. Matching in terms of hearing the bass over and above the other frequencies in balance. The idea being that if you didn't reduce the volume, the bass would be somewhat obscured, wouldn't be that obvious, it wouldn't be as accurate as it should be, because the mids and the highs are louder relatively to the single subwoofer. But when you go for the 2.2 and you set it in the app for maximum volume, so first of all, you're getting maximum volume, there's no reduction in the volume in the Mark IIIs. The left subwoofer plays the left channel and the right subwoofer plays the right channel. So I know subwoofers are supposed to be non-directional, but it's a matter of debate. And in terms of using these speakers when you are going for a decent stereo setup, which is probably the idea of having the 2.2, and you've got them nice and wide, it does make a difference having only left channel played from one subwoofer and the right channel played from the other, and up close to the actual Mark IIIs. And there is a bit of an issue when, you may want to have the sub in the middle. May not. Obviously, you may still believe that it's completely non-directional and it's going to make no difference where the sub is. However, if you think it does make a difference, I personally think it does, you want the sub somewhere near your Mark III. So just to point out, why it's not just about going louder, but it is also about left-right separation. It's about trying to get, what these Mark IIIs, what the whole Minirig system is capable of, really nice stereo imaging. That thing that sets hi-fi apart from everything else, the immersiveness. So it's not just about, on this recording is more bass or I could better mids or whatever. It's about how immersive it is. You are getting some sort of 3D image from these speakers, which I don't get from any of the other Bluetooth kind of speakers that I've personally had. And it is in its class of its own when it comes to that, to having something that is between a true hi-fi and a portable Bluetooth speaker. So not that much difference at 40%. So the next test is at a more likely volume. If you're going for a 2.2 setup, the sort of volume you're likely to be playing at 73%.
We're inside haunting, like a drug I keep on wanting. There's a love that fits so perfect, it's hard to believe. There's a reason I can feel my heart stop beating, and the air gets tough just breathing. I'm alone, but I'm still feeling like someone's with me. It's strange, I know, but I feel like you're here with me, like chasing ghosts. I know you're out there. It's strange, I know. Like chasing
On the Tivoli, Tiber, the river by Sant'Angelo. Light music, romantico, it's very, very, very. Please, you come.
I wish I could.
Oh.
If I'm with you, I'm just little girl. My baby, I'll be your floor tonight. 시간이 멈춘 듯해. 너와 내가 있던 곳에 눈을 감고 있으면 이미 나는 너와 함께하고 있는 듯해. I just wanna be with you. I just thinking about you tonight. 오늘 같아. 어두운 밤이 나를 집어삼킬 때 나는 그 자리에 이대로 있어줄래. 너와 내가 함께하는 밤은 남해. 정말 아름다울 거야. 걱정 마지, baby. Don't worry, yeah, you're the only one for me, babe. You already know. You already know. My baby.
So at 73%, the difference is huge. So you've got to remember to keep everything balanced. When you've got a 2.1 system, you reduce the volumes of the main mini-rigs using the app to match the single subwoofer. And when you go to 2.2, you play the mini-rigs themselves at maximum volume because you now have two subwoofers. That translates into a big difference. So first of all, having the two mini-rigs Mark III at maximum volume, the mids is a big difference between 2.1 and 2.2. 40%, you couldn't really see that much difference, but as you go up the volume scale, the difference becomes pretty big. So first of all, it's no longer the same frequency response. You're getting more mids with a 2.2. In terms of the actual bass peak itself, 59 Hz minus 24.7 on the 2.1, 61 Hz minus 23 decibels on the 2.2. 3.7 decibels difference just by having that second subwoofer as you go up the volume scale. Doesn't show at the lower volumes, but the higher volumes, its difference is huge. It's 3.7 decibels. That's more than doubling the power that you'd expect. 3.7 decibels. A-weighted doesn't really make a lot of sense at these allowed volumes. It's all because that curve is all about low volume. I've just put it there as a matter of interest, showing the same thing. But really, C-weight is what you would normally use louder volumes to simulate what your ear would hear. But basically, it's C-weighted is kind of flat, so sheer loudness tells you what's going on. And the sheer loudness, RMS, the average volume, minus 18.2 for the 2.1, minus 14.8 for the 2.2. 3.4 decibels louder using two subwoofers. Of course, this is because you have to reduce the main mini-rigs themselves to match a single subwoofer, and you don't have to do that when you have a 2.2. You still have to set it up in the app though. So 73% volume. The difference between a 2.1 and a 2.2 is huge. So now these sort of volumes, at these high volumes, this is where it really comes into its own, having the 2.2. You do get a considerable amount of more bass. It's not going deeper, obviously it's still capable, it's still only capable of going as deep as a single subwoofer, but you're getting more bass slam, you're getting your left-right separation. It's a better sound, it's a sharper sound, I think the stereo imaging is better, and it's considerably louder. Over 3 decibels is like more than doubling the power. Don't forget, in terms of what these speakers are capable of and what the power actually is on paper, 40 watt per Minirig Mark III and 30 watts per subwoofer Mark II, which means 80 watts, 60 watts. You're talking about a 140 watt system. So we're talking about something really significant. You'd expect it to go loud, and it does. But in terms of, does it make a lot of difference if I had a second subwoofer? At over 50% volumes, when you're hitting these 70% volumes, it's significant, the difference when you add a second subwoofer. So the only question left is, what are the maximum volumes? When you go to the extremes, at 100%, what is the real difference between these systems? And for real comparisons, and just to show you in extreme situation, the difference a subwoofer is making, I'm also putting in the 2.0 system in comparison. So this is maximum volume. So maximum volume, I've thrown in the Minirigs just as a 2.0 to really show you at the extreme end, at maximum volume 100%, exactly the difference between having subwoofers and not having subwoofers. So the 2.0, 2.1, first thing you notice, in the mids, 2.0 is stronger in the mids because it's at maximum volume, whereas on 2.1 it's reduced to match the subwoofer. But in absolute terms, adding the subwoofer, it's still louder, even though the Minirigs themselves are reduced in volume. So, first of all, the bass. Well, it's completely gone on the Minirigs themselves. So the Minirig Mark III does drastically reduce bass as you go up the volume scale. By the time you're hitting maximum volume, you basically got no bass, but let's pretend there's some bass there. So the bass peak would be 67 Hz minus 41.6. On the 2.1, 64 Hz minus 28.3. It's 13 decibels louder in the bass. There's a difference between hearing bass and not hearing bass. So if you're listening at high volumes, the subwoofer is an absolute no-brainer, I think. Average volume, minus 18.7, minus 19.1. Not quite as dramatic in terms of average volume because the 2.0 has more mids, the 2.1 has more bass. So it kind of compensates in that way, but it's still louder on the 2.1. And although the RMS is quite close, using a sound pressure level meter, the difference was actually a bit more dramatic, 96 decibels, 99 decibels. So the peak on the sound pressure level meter, difference of 3 decibels. Obviously there's a lot more power in the bass. And then 2.1 versus 2.2, again, you're back to having maximum volume on the Minirigs themselves, so you got a bit more of the mids, and you got a lot more of the bass. So the bass peak, 64 Hz, 26.3, 2.2, 28.3, 2.1. So 2 decibels louder in the bass at maximum volume with a second subwoofer. Average sound, the RMS 2.2 is 2.9 decibels louder. That's on average. So I mean, you know, that is a lot. That's doubling the power. 18.7, 2.1, minus 15.8, 2.2. Sound pressure level meter, 1 meter. Again, measuring absolute peaks. 101.2, 99 decibels. It's 2.2 decibels louder with the 2.2. Adding a second subwoofer. It's all about if you play at maximum volume or not. The louder you go, the more difference it makes, as the Mark IIIs themselves reduce their own bass, together with the fact that if you've only got one, you get less of the mids with a 2.1 system compared to a 2.2 because of the reduction in absolute volume on the Mark IIIs themselves. So that really nails, you know, where you're going to get a difference between adding a single subwoofer and the two subwoofers. Basically, the louder you go. So you know what volumes you're currently playing your 2.1 system. You know, if you're thinking, well, 2.1, 2.2. If you've got a 2.1 system and you're pushing it all the way, 70, 80%, and it's not quite as satisfying as you really want, it's going to make a big difference if you add a second subwoofer. It's going to make a big difference in your bass slam. It's not going to go deeper, but in terms of having no subwoofers, it will, because basically at maximum volumes or near maximum volumes, the Mark IIIs basically have no bass of their own. They're capable of bass, but to stop it distorting, it's cutting dramatically its own bass. It does have a dynamic limiter within the Mark III, and I should point out, I have not had issues with my limiter. Sometimes I hear it a click as it cuts in bass heavy, sudden bass heavy tracks. People are telling me they have issues with distortion as the bass limiter cuts in. So real distortion, and it's going on for more than a single click as that limiter cuts in. So some people are saying that they have that issue. I haven't. I still say my Minirig system, you know, is as good as anything I've heard in a portable setup. If you still consider it portable, it is a bit of a hassle. There are connectivity issues. I have to say my stereo link, my wireless link doesn't work at all, which it did work on the Mark II. So if I pair them in stereo, the idea being next time you start them up, they'll automatically pair. Mine don't. It's not something I've raised at the moment with Minirig support. So for me, maybe better stereo imaging has been more of a benefit than trying to find, you know, as much volume out of the system as I can. I think personally, the stereo imaging has been improved for my liking, and that's why I think to me it was worth it. When I want a really immersive listen and something I can go portable with, 2.2 does beat the 2.1. So I hope you got something out of this. I hope it answered some questions people are asking about. Can you compare 2.1 to 2.2? I think I covered everything. Obviously I didn't cover low gain because personally low gain doesn't have enough volume for me. It is a high quality mode. It is better in the bass. It does sound warmer, but it doesn't quite go loud enough for me. Not much louder than on the Mark IIs. And I think for most people getting a 2.2 system, it's about high gain rather than low gain. So yeah, I hope you got something out of my video, and thank you for watching.
UK